Welcome back to Tasteland. I am your co-host, Francis Zierer.
And I'm Daisy Alioto.
And Daisy, who are we talking to today?
Today, we're talking to Cora Lewis. She is a writer and award-winning journalist at the Associated Press, and her fiction debut, Information Age, is coming out on July 15th with Joyland Editions.
I read this book last Thursday. I was waiting for a flight going to Canada for the long weekend. And this flight got...
just popping up to Canada for the long weekend.
Just popping up to Canada for the long weekend for our nation's birthday. But flight got delayed like an hour, and then it was so delayed on the tarmac. I read 2/3 of the book between the time I boarded the plane and we took off. It was that long of a delay. But it's also just a book that I did not want to put down. It's really, I don't know. It just kind of, I flew through it. I flowed through it. Two different words. Both are true.
That broke my brain a little bit.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. That's why I stopped talking.
It's a great tarmac book. I read it in one sitting twice.
Okay,
I read it when it was first sent to me, I think a few months ago as a PDF. And then my beautiful pre-ordered physical copy arrived yesterday. And I heard it arrive and I ran downstairs to get it and I social media'd it, and I read it again in one sitting last night as if it were Christmas morning. That's right, Francis.
It's really good. I'm going to be recommending it to people. I'll probably pass my copy. I bought a physical copy as well. I'll probably pass it along to a friend.
Here's another argument for novellas. Okay. They fit in your pocket. Mm-hmm. Great. But also it's easier to recommend to somebody because you're like, even if
it's going to take you just a few hours.
Right. Like, I don't think there's anything to dislike about this book. Obviously, I think it's fantastic. But I think some of what keeps us from recommending something to somebody, especially a busy person, is we automatically think about protecting that person's time.
Yeah. True.
But this is truly a book you can read one sitting, and by design, because it is a novella from a new press made specifically to publish novellas, which have historically been sort of sidelined by the publishing industry, despite the fact that readers love them. And so it's a very easy book to recommend, and also an easy book to gift, because you're giving something to somebody that they will be able to finish.
Great summer. It's summer wedding season. I would say it's a great summer wedding accessory in that it fits in a jacket pocket. Let's say, fellas, you're at the wedding. Maybe you went solo. You don't really know anybody. You should know some people. You're at this wedding. See a bridesmaid. You're smoking a cigarette. You pull this out of your pocket. You post up. It's.
Wait, maybe I'll do this. No, I might do this on my Instagram later, so nobody steal it.
Yeah.
Have you seen those memes? It's like little something to take an edge off, and it's like things like cigarettes. Little something to take an edge off. I'm doing it with the book right now, and guys, I can lift it with 2 fingers very comfortably. And so if you're a man, I bet you could lift it even more comfortably.
I'm not going to try. Okay, let's go talk to Cora.
Okay, so Information Age is the first novella from Joyland Editions, and what I love about it, the audience can't see this, obviously. Oh my God, everyone hold up your copy.
We're all holding it up. It's this beautiful blue color.
Hope you're all having FOMO because you need to order your own copy, but there's a beautiful, classy, number 1 in the upper right corner to signify that this is an edition, and I think that's really cool because there's something about the idea of books that you not only collect, but can go on the shelf together. And I know some people are sickos and do color coordination. I don't do that, but
I don't think anybody who listens to this podcast, I would hope, has long since abandoned that if it's something they ever did.
We listen and we don't judge, but
yeah, we're not. I'm not listening, and I'm actually dictating and I'm judging. So
the podcasters don't judge.
The other thing that I noticed, Cora, is there's been, well, I'm laughing because Bluets, I would say, is almost like an interliterary world meme at this point. It's a very good book, but it has come to signify, I think, more than itself. So, but outside of Bluets, I would say there has been discourse, especially kind of on the technology side, about the significance of blue, like Facebook Blue. And then after the success of Facebook, other companies try and use blue to almost form this like subconscious trust and affiliation with Facebook and Meta. But I was thinking about the color blue and all the smart writing I've read on it, because Fitzcarraldo Editions does have these plain blue covers. But what I was going to say about this cover is it's more purple when I got it in person, and it is a beautiful shade. Joyland has always used blue, and I feel like this might cause a little bit of a publishing trend piece to percolate on the beauty of a monochromatic cover, but I'm a huge fan. And it's not entirely monochromatic. There's a beautiful illustration of a smartphone with a wave, and it ties in with the plot. But how involved were you with the design, Cora? And if you weren't super involved, like, how do you feel about its packaging?
I love the size, which I guess I was involved with in terms of generating the amount of content that would go into this book. Specifically the novella length, the slim volume quality of it. So there's that. And I was shown some different ideas for the cover, some different graphics and designs. There was one of a sort of 90s mouse surfing on a wave, which I came to realize also could signify surfing the web, which I hadn't really been thinking about, but I like that play on for this cover as well. And yeah, I also love the number 1 in the corner. I had worked at Dorothy, a publishing project, which puts out these beautiful 2 slim books a year. And I know Michelle and King was inspired by them. And so I think the numbers is a nice way to gesture towards that, towards being one of a series. Someone told me when I was expressing anxiety about the book coming out, "You're number 1. It's right there on the cover." So
exactly.
I'm holding onto that.
Well, you and I also had an exchange, also like unsolicited. Like, at no point did you say anything to me about anxiety about a book coming out. But knowing what I know about how it feels to have something in the world, I was telling Cora about some of my recent embarrassments, again, unsolicited, and that I think anything worth doing has to feel embarrassing. Like, if it doesn't feel a little bit embarrassing, like you're not doing enough to put yourself out there, you're not putting enough skin in the game.
Do you want to air any of those on the pod?
Yeah, no, I think the one specifically, Cora was part of our Mrs. Dalloway collab with Urban Stems, and I spelled Virginia Woolf wrong in like 3 different places, and it took me 2 days to notice. It's so, and that's like, I'll do like 10 of those a week, but I mean, maybe not 10, but I feel like I do something at least once a day, you know, that was like, do one thing every day that scares you. I'm doing one thing every day that's like embarrassing.
This reminds me of a device I liked in the book that I think came up. It was like happened twice, where which I can't remember reading anybody else doing this recently, where the narrator will mishear a word, and then it's written like that, and then she's one example I'm thinking of is this character says something about miasma, and she's like, miasma, what do you mean? And he's like, no, my asthma. And you did that a couple times, which I thought was really fun.
Incandescent and iridescent in that interaction between the narrator and her younger sister.
I don't know if the miasma will play on radio, but I guess, right, she thinks it's the Greek cloud of shame, and he means the difficulty with your lungs. But because we're talking on the radio, you can't see that it's spelled differently. So I felt the need to do that. But I love those moments.
Our listeners, we make them use their imagination. Their minds are igel. And I will say, when you said slim volume, I was thinking about the narrator does like to smoke a cheeky cigarette, and somebody should coin the Virginia Slim volume, which is when you buy a novella, but there's a single cigarette taped to it. Also, speaking of embarrassing, so I'm wearing my Joyland hat. And so taking a step back, we sort of touched on this in the intro, but Joyland Editions was started by Michelle Lynn King and Maddie Crum, both of whom have contributed to Dirt. Maddie wrote a great piece about Sheila Heti, and Michelle wrote an amazing piece for our Summer of Bibliomancy last year called Is That Right? But they started Joyland Editions to address like a specific hole in the publishing market that's bothered me for a long time, which is, where are all the novellas? People love a slim volume, but the publishing industry, like, big publishing is biased against it. And I've never understood why. So I was so excited to see Joyland Editions enter the world. And I bought this hat. And so the hat says, well, it's backwards. I haven't memorized the hat, actually. It's a quote from a story by Fran Hofmer. And it's, if you use this
dialogue in your movie, you owe me $4,000.
Thank you, Cora. So I haven't worn the hat because, you have a hat that's like, it's almost too clever. I'm afraid somebody's going to ask me about it, and I'm like going to do a bad job. Like,
forget the reference
about the hat. Yeah. Like, it just begs somebody to ask you about it. But I love it. And the other reason I haven't worn it as much is the last time I had a white hat, somebody sent it to me and I was wearing it, and my husband and I were eating dinner and we had finished up, and you're like at the table still, and you and your spouse are just like shooting the shit.
Mm-hmm.
We're shooting the shit. And, I like reach up to sort of like rub my forehead, and I push the hat up, and the hat like in slow motion flips forward and falls into the remnants of pasta sauce on my plate. And Ben just goes, "Oh, that's rough." I mean, the hat is totally destroyed. I washed it, but it's done. So
it's a
part of me is like,
white. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're a proud Italian.
I'm Italian.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying that to you. You're a proud
So you're
Italian.
saying I deserved that?
No, I was saying it's typical.
It's typical.
Let's move on. Let's move on. Okay, let's move on. Okay. I was wondering about the title. I was looking at your previously published fiction, and this was used as the title for a piece in the Yale Review published in 2022. Which, reading it as I did earlier, it was really interesting because the first two lines are the same as the first two lines of the book, but then the other bits are all these bits that are scattered throughout the book. And some of my favorite lines, like one is. Back in New York, a booth in a bar. It's got Warhols on the walls. I hear a woman tell her date. She's hoping to impress. The thing about Warhol, says the date, was he was prolific, which is such a great line. And then it's a bunch of these. And I think all of these are scattered throughout the book. So my question is, was this, like, where did the title come from? And was this particular piece of fiction like the moment when you were starting to form all these notes you'd been taking into this book, or did this come a little bit after and you're kind of testing the waters?
Yeah, this piece was picked from the Slush by Rachel Manheimer, who's a very talented poet and editor. I really recommend her writing. And it was my first or second year at the MFA, and I was sending out these pieces that were composed of snippets and notes that I was organizing into what would become this book. And I think I had just found that title and was so happy about it because it seemed to capture so much about what the book was, kind of coming of age in a time of information overload. And it was maybe playful, but also kind of, capacious and a little bit understated. Maybe it wasn't kind of hitting you over the head with what the book would be about, but also technology. And I was so happy that Rachel took that piece because it felt like the first kind of affirmation that I was onto something, and it was okay to just string these little scenes together, and the vignettes would accumulate to something that felt entertaining enough and meaningful enough to constitute a story.
Well, Frances and I both had the same question, and I'm sure that you'll get it a lot, which is like, does this count as an internet novel in the sense that the internet novel has been discoursed about? And for me, I think it's very apparent to me as somebody who also worked in journalism, similar to the narrator, similar to yourself, that yes, there is an element in the book of thinking in fragments that the current attention economy seems to incentivize, and that like if your attention is constantly shifting, the thoughts that you're having are shorter and they might string together in unusual ways. But there's something about it that's also very timeless in the sense that like reporters have always kept a reporter's notebook where you're taking down fragments, where you're taking down observations, where you're taking down a single sentence somebody says, and the narrator talks about like always listening for that sort of key line that's going to be like the lead or start the nut graph or be the kicker and be the thing that ties a piece together, especially when you're working in a style that's like more like AP style, where there's a line where the narrator talks about a certain type of news site where it's like unstyled news is its own style. It is like the 5-paragraph essay of news stories. And anyone who reads AP or Reuters or a less styled news piece can tell you that there are components and there are building blocks, but those building blocks always have to include some of these lines that you're listening for. And so I think the way that this book is like an internet novel to me is inseparable from the way it's like a journalist's novel, which is part of the reason why I wanted to have you come on the podcast, because I think for that reason, this really sits between, the way Dirt writes about literature and the way that we like cover tech.
Yeah, I think all of that is so true. I'm so happy you took all of that from the book because I feel the same way. I think Renata Adler wrote Speedboat before the internet, and it was the same reporter's notebook arranged according to her own associative logic. And Patricia Lockwood writes in this way, and she's definitely a writer of the internet. And so the fact that there can be these connections between these two styles across time is really satisfying to me. Or Elizabeth Hardwick wrote this way, or, it doesn't seem to me necessarily tied to the present in all the ways you describe. But then at the same time, of course, it's really modern and contemporary to have these blips and these telegraphic dispatches, like tweets or Instagram posts or whatever you can scroll through really easily.
One of my favorite things that you did in this book too was very short chapters. There's one chapter that is literally one sentence. I'll read it, but maybe producer Tom bleep it out just so the listeners have to actually read the book. But okay, so it's part 4, chapter 6. That would just like blew me away reading that. And then that's the only thing on the page. And then there's a number of short chapters after that. And I was reading it as the PDF on my phone, and I started like taking screenshots of all of them. And maybe there was some before then, I don't know. But that one, I just stared at it. It was so stark. Tell us about these super short chapters. I think that's the shortest one, but there's a couple others like that just like are such a power move.
Well, I'm really grateful to Maddie and Joyland for being behind those moves and the way the book is arranged and edited, that they let me include chapters like that. I think there was a version of the book without any chapters and without any sections. And there were some where there were headings kind of grouping, what's going on under particular categories, which was definitely wrong. So I'm glad we got rid of that. But I do agree that the way that chapters operate in the book is helpful in terms of creating, just rhythm and a cadence that you can then interrupt in a fun way where it's kind of carrying you along in the longer chapters. I think the juxtaposition between the few cases where there are longer scenes and you get to linger and maybe a memory or something dramatic that's happening, and that put up against these very short texts or an email or quiz, I find really fun as a reader and writer, I guess. And I also think it mimics the experience of being on the internet or being alive
Definitely.
now. There's something about writing in fragments that reminds me of like kind of the old wisdom about painters like Picasso, where people are like, oh, like why, children are always like, why is this guy able to do just an abstract shape? And of course there's like, I could do that. And obviously a lot of the artists who worked in surrealism or abstract expressionism, cubism, whatever you want to call it, first mastered the fundamentals of figure drawing. And, I think there's a certain type of person who might say like, oh, well, I could absolutely write a book in fragments, but there's an artistry and a craft to like putting them together. And one way that I've heard it described by one of my mentors, Laurie Stone, is sort of like, who also often writes fragmented prose, is like running your hand across the page and feeling where the heat is. I also think there's something very musical about it. And as somebody who's interested in like ambient and experimental music, it feels a little bit like the musical corollary of a fragmented novel. But I'm interested to hear from you, like, how do you, when you have so many fragments, you're not going to use all of them in the book. You're going to have to leave some of them on the cutting room floor, as meaningful as they feel. How do you know you've reached kind of a critical mass of inclusion and material? And like, when you're putting it together, obviously associations are unconscious, but is there like, are you picturing something in your head? Is there a little like bulb that goes off? Does it feel like composing? And how does it feel like in your body when you're like, okay, this is done?
I love the composing analogy. That's so nice. And I love thinking about the musicality of it too. Yeah, I think there is something intuitive to knowing if something is harmoniously paired or if it's dissonant somehow. And yeah, I guess I do feel it in my body or my ear or when I read it back to myself. I think because it took me such a long time to write, I was submitting little excerpts of it and as stories for a number of years. I mean, 2020 was when that one was published, and it's 2025. So sometimes editors would kind of affirm for me that something had a shape or enough of a shape to constitute a story. And then there were enough stories to constitute a novella, according to these two wonderful people who are publishing it, if not the big five publishing houses. And even then, I think editing the book with Maddie, we thought a lot about character and plot and what a reader might want at different points in the book, where context was needed or more characterization was needed. And the fragments, as lovely as they are and as fun as it is to have to make those jumps yourself, maybe didn't quite add up. And so I think for me, always having other smarter readers is also really helpful as a part of the process.
This like composition of the fragments is reminding me of like a way of writing that shifted for me a couple of years ago. I was working at a job where we used Notion, and like I always joked that 90% of my job was just using Notion. And in Notion, right, it's all blocks. And before, any like writing I'd done was in Microsoft Word or something, but there I was writing entire things, blog posts, articles, social media posts, whatever in Notion. And it like led me to start taking like a block here and put it there, whether it's like in a different piece or whether it's just like rearranging blocks because it's so easy to just pick up and drag within the app. And now most of my writing I do in Beehive, which is like the same sort of thing. And I'll move blocks around like that. But I just bring it up because it strikes me that like the idea of this, whether or not this is an internet novel, like that kind of like that fragmentary way of writing, and the way that like over time, like reading this piece from 2022, the information age in the Yale Review, it's like seeing how these fragments have moved. I guess mostly an observation, classic. But if there's a question in there, it is like, how were you like actually, were you doing like, printing things out and cutting things and moving them around? How did you compose?
Yeah, Cora, were you socially engineered by Markdown or the WordPress CMS? Also, do you write in the CMS?
Not when I can help it, but
yeah, it's the most dangerous game. I forget who this is. Like, if this is you, write in. I do believe it was like one of the older Gawker adjacent people, but somebody writes in the URL field of their browser.
That's horrifying.
I also know people who still write longhand and type it up. My handwriting has completely atrophied, so I can't do that. But it's interesting how the tools that we use shape the way that we think. Again, not a novel observation, very much sort of what this is about as well. But also like there's like a real like warmth to this book, in that like I think it's equally about how the relationships that we're in shape the way that we think. And it reminds me of like this book that we put out with Night Gallery earlier this year, where like we solicited people's iPhone note screenshots. And it was cool to see at aggregate that like putting something in an iPhone note represents a certain type of thinking. But there was like a lot of warmth to those as well.
Some of this was written in the Notes app for sure. And that into Microsoft Word and then printed out onto paper. And then, yes, I did rearrange them and cut them up and use index cards and all the things. There was definitely a 2-week period where I had this residency at Malay Arts, and I was using different color-coded color codes and color highlighter colors. Sorry, I'm stumbling, but to sort of follow her professional life and her personal life and her family life and where she was, and to try and distribute all of those things in an even way so that it wasn't too much of any one at a given time. And I do think it's really modular, and that's something that is interesting to me about the book, that a lot of these fragments could exist in different places, and maybe that would change the story, but that taken together, you do arrive at the same place over this period of years.
Was there a bulletin board involved in this process?
No, it was mostly on the floor and a big desk. There should have been a bulletin board with string, like the meme.
QAnon style.
Well, Daisy, what you were just saying about warmth, the book I read directly before this was Vincenzo Latronico's Perfection. So I can't help but make some comparisons because, I read them a couple weeks apart. But when you were saying about warmth, Daisy, I was thinking of this, these are both books about being in your 20s in the 2010s and working as a young professional in vaguely media on your laptop in a city, one in New York, one in Berlin. But the Latronico one, which I also really liked, is so cold and rigid. There's no dialogue. It's all told in this very matter of fact way. Whereas Years is so warm and is so lived in and deals with some of the same themes, but the Latronico is there'll be this one chapter that's about how this couple is thinking about are they polyamorous or are they not, or how are they and their friends dealing with this refugee crisis and virtue signaling and all that. Whereas Years touches on a bunch of these other themes of being in your 20s and 30s in a city, but in this more modular, warm, lived-in way that I think they're very different. I'm not trying to say one has a quality that the other doesn't.
Almost entirely dialogue, just to talk.
Yes, yeah, it is. But no, it was a really interesting pairing. I really liked reading them together. I found both relatable in different ways. I'll rebel for a second more. I read all of your book on a plane last Thursday. 2/3 of it we were just taxing, right? It was a very captive audience. But reading through it, some of the ways you talk about death and and birth, I was thinking a lot that morning. This famous soccer player had died, Diogo Jota, and just reading all these. He was 28 and his brother died. He was 25 in this car crash, and reading all these tributes from people. And then one of my best friends had a baby born the same day too. So I was very in a mood of thinking about life and death. And you have these 2 lines I pulled over eggs, bacon, and hash browns. Saul tells me very, very definitions of life now going. His favorite is the sum of functions by which death is resisted. And then there's this other one. We think the point of a kid is to grow up because it does grow up. My father tells me by the sandbox. But the point of a kid is to play. If you always look to the end, the point of life would be death. So I guess to put a pin in it, those I found very, very warm and moving ways to think about death and to think about life and children.
The point of life is to put a pin in it.
The point of life is to put a pin in it. It is.
The point of life is to circle back.
Is to circle back. Or are you trying to circle back on something here, Daisy?
No, I'm not. Well, I mean, the point of life is to piggyback off of that. One thing that I wrote down, I don't want to stunt on Francis, but I did read your book twice. I read it in one sitting when you emailed me the PDF, and then I read it again last night in one sitting to be prepped for this. And I wrote down, basically everyone in the book, everyone the narrator encounters has a clever line. There's something about the book where it seems like everyone is capable of cleverness, which if you talk to most people about the majority of the population, are most people clever? It's no, most people are stupid as shit. You know what I mean? But there's something about journalism, I think specifically, that requires you to see the cleverness in every person or to want to highlight the most clever thing somebody has said in the entire time that you've talked to them. Yeah, it's a generosity of spirit. And I think that that also contributes to the warmth of the book. Like, there's no character in the book who is characterized as stupid or unfeeling. And that's like a specific type of filtering in the narrator's worldview that I think is really informed by her vocation as well.
I think that's right. I may have said this previously, but that idea that you're supposed to quote people warmly and generously and accurately. And that's the ethic of being a fair-minded journalist, that you're not really trying to catch people out. You're trying to take the best version of their argument and put that on the page. And so maybe that did lead to some of what's going on in the book. So the flip side of that being that it's a fairly stylized version of life, since, of course, no one is witty and clever all the time, and there isn't a zinger on every page of life. And, you know,
I mean, hot take though, I think memory is the stylized version of life. Mm-hmm. Like, experiences are not stylized as you go through them.
You can't write life to scale.
No, not at all. I mean, unless you're like now scarred.
Well, but even now scarred, it's so stylized, and that's like, you know, that's like his so much memory in him, like trying to remember these things. But it's very long, but that doesn't mean it's to scale. Yeah,
right. How experience feels.
Yeah, I mean, not to dip into controversy, and like, admittedly, I did not read the Rolling Stone article about how the alt-lit scene in LA bringing back like anti-woke, like whatever. I don't care.
I'm pleased to report I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, great. So you win the internet. I mean, when I've heard, I didn't read the piece, but when I've heard that type of writing argued for in the past, it's always like, they feel like they're advocating for realism, right? And it's like, how can you advocate for realism in the world of literature when memory itself, the second an experience passes and you retell it, you're not doing stenography. Everything that you write is a form of curation, and your brain is in my piece about AI, where I talk about how attention is the thing that makes us human. Like, I say like attention. Seminals, shut up.
I'm not joking.
Attention is like the biological curator, right? And death is the endpoint curator. So if our brain is already curating experience for us, like, what is the point for arguing for the ugliest version of realism? Like, it's more honest to say, like, I wanted to write something ugly than to try to say it's realistic, because the second it ends up on the page, you've exited realism. It hasn't been real since you went through it. Even as you're going through it, like, you were, you know, we can't, it's like, sorry, I'm going to stop talking, but it's kind of the intellectual equivalent of, like, you know, the physical and the physics principle. Like, we're never touching each other, right? Our molecules are pushing against each other. So we're never really writing our experience either.
Right. So if you're going to stylize it, it's just a question of how you're stylizing it. If you're making it more beautiful or less beautiful or higher definition or blurrier, or what it is you're choosing to pay attention
or
to.
AP style.
Or AP style.
You might say
maybe your next book should be called AP style.
You might say that writing is the sum of functions by which ugliness is resisted.
Ooh, Francis, write that down.
Wait, I missed that one. What was that?
I was circling back on your own line, saying that maybe writing is the sum of functions by which ugliness is resisted, by which truth is resisted, by which, I don't know, truth is found.
Now we're really getting into epistemological weeds.
Pedantic on here.
I think I will say I hope that the book doesn't feel sort of sanitized. That I don't think that is, something that I would want, you know, where you sort of burnish all the rough edges. Like, hopefully there's still some roughness and friction, but even amidst all of the curation, the very careful years-long curation.
It definitely does not feel sanitized. And like, I have had the pleasure of editing Maddie and Michelle. I've never been edited by them. But one thing like they both do in their writing is, you know, like a very skilled architect, when you walk into a building that's been done by a skilled architect and it's clear that the building has been really designed to unify form and function. This is not just a utility, based space or function based space, that you don't think about the architecture of the building. Like when it's done well, you're not in there thinking, oh, and this is how the walls connect to the ceiling. Or, this wall is, designed to hold this amount of weight, because, the function of the architect is almost to make you forget you're in the space. But then there'll also be like a little bit of a hint of the structure, right? Like you get a little bit of a peek of the craft. And that is something I've noticed both about Maddie and Michelle. They're such skilled architects in their writing. Every once in a while, they give you like a little peek of the beams or a little peek of the joints, just to remind you that somebody has connected these things for you. And I very much felt that, like, reading this book, it did not feel overly stylized or sanded down. It felt like walking through a space like that.
I'm so glad to hear that. I appreciate that.
But I have to ask, did you have like a playlist for the book? Did you have like a aesthetic mood board?
I guess there's some art and some visual art and some films that I think didn't quite make it into the book that used to be there. There was a Chantal Ackerman, The Moving News from Home, actually, which may be too on the nose, in which she's reading her mother's letters to her while she makes the film in New York. That had been in the book. The narrator just sort of watched that movie, and there were some sort of museum trips and other references to visual art. I think musically, gosh, what was I even listening to? Some Max Richter. I don't always. I listen to the radio lately while I write, which I think is also kind of a appropriate source of music, in that it's also got these voices that it feels very alive and warm, and someone's curating for you, so that's probably part of it. But also just the internet was such an aesthetic for the years that I was working at BuzzFeed News, and the years in which I was writing this book, and the last couple of years. So I think kind of the wash of information and data and visuals that were coming at all of us means if that can be an aesthetic.
Wait, I wanted to ask about your relationship to the internet and social media, in that when preparing for this, I looked up your social media and such, as one does. It's quite sparse. LinkedIn, very sparse. Twitter, I was very quickly able to scroll to the end of your tweets. There's only like a couple dozen of them.
Okay, but she does have the handle Cora, which think
is insane.
Is a bigger flex.
That is a massive flex.
Let's see that for me. Yep.
But so there's that, and then I read your Creative Independent interview, and like your letterbox was mentioned. That's maybe your most active. You have a Goodreads. You've only logged 3 books, I think, your own and maybe a friend's.
Wow.
But all of this to say, like at the beginning of this, we were talking about like, is this an internet novel, etc. But I just found it interesting that you don't seem to be a very prolific user of some of these platforms. Poster, at least. Maybe you're an addicted consumer like myself.
It's like how so many bartenders are sober.
I love that. Yes.
I will say, like, this book does take place in the same canonical universe as the Llama Chase. And for that, we are grateful. I like that the narrator sort of picks up on this theme in what goes viral and where a lot of misinformation lives, because I think I've thought about this a lot too. Like, why is it so recurrent that like when there's like a flood or a big natural disaster, people love to create a fake story about animals being free from the zoo, or like
the sharks swimming on the highway, and it's a classic
image.
And
I've like done a little bit of research that something like that did happen, I believe, in Tbilisi, Georgia, and has happened other places, but most of the time it's a hoax. And my theory is like it's a way for like the unconscious imagination to imagine a version of freedom that we don't feel like is available to us. But I also think like part of the reason the llama chase went so viral is like we were rooting for the llama and the llama's freedom. And I think I was thinking about that the most when I was writing about Flacco, the owl. But we've moved past the sort of like lolcats version of the viral internet, but I still think there's a huge interest in what animals are doing really at any given time.
I think that's true. Recently, there were 2 animals that escaped and ate a bunch of treats for a week, and that was a story that became popular. It's just a timeless tale. The llamas was definitely a time when BuzzFeed was also engineering attention. The dress was just an optical illusion that went so wildly viral that kind of just...
Yanni Laurel, the watermelon.
Yes, the watermelon.
I remember where I was when the watermelon burst, and I was in the International Business Times newsroom.
I was in the
BuzzFeed
newsroom.
Wait,
yeah, gathered around
What
a
are you talking
computer while everyone was like, why didn't you think of this, Daisy? You're our social media director.
The watermelon?
Do you remember putting the rubber bands on the watermelon until
You're
it
not if you
exploded?
didn't work on the internet. I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, to answer your question, I think if anything, working in media has given me this wariness of the internet and its power and what it can do. And listening to you describe my entire internet presence, which, by the way, that you found everything. So good job.
That's what somebody who had another secret account would say.
Yeah.
I guess
That's exactly what I would say if
There's a
somebody
small-
had.
Well, a lot of
done
pots
anything.
calling kettles black over here.
Cora, are you on Fragrantica?
Which one?
Oh, Fragrantica. No, that's okay. Got it that way.
For the fragrances. I do know about this. Yeah.
As for the fragrances, there's also like
It's also
sometimes
for,
a
the
banner that
screenshots
says
for Twitter.
Free Assange.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, you haven't seen that.
The animal, as an aside, the animals, what are animals up to thing? There's this photographer, Stephen Gill. Are either of you familiar with him?
Well, dude.
I don't think so.
So I found him because Nausgaard wrote the 1 or 2 intros to a couple of his photo books, and I read it in the New Yorker, and so I bought these books. But my favorite one is The Pillar, and he's this British photographer, but I think it's rural Sweden or Norway where he moved, and he lives on some farmland. He set up a fence post, and then he set up another fence post facing it with one of those hunting cameras where it's activated by motion. And so there's I don't know, a couple hundred photos in this book. But it's just these beautiful scenes of a flock of crows going by, or 2 crows grappling in midair, or eagles or something. And then he has this other one too, Night Procession, where he did a similar thing but set up in the woods, and it's boar and deers, and it's all kind of sepia tone because it's at night. So I'll say for fans of animals, what are they up to? Stephen Gill, amazing photographer.
Trail cam.
Just wanted to throw that out there. Trail cam, that's the word.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe I follow this on Twitter. There's some really beautifully curated trail cam photos out there.
Yeah,
Also,
I bet
there's
some over there.
a photographer who did a project, I want to say called 4 Eyes or 8 Eyes, where he took these beautiful ad takes of what the Google Maps cars were shooting. So it might be animals, it might be people, but they're these very curated images of kind of outtakes. So when the cars, are traveling the world and mapping it. So I recommend that also as kind of a surreal, half automated, half human visual series.
I love the section of the book where the narrator is walking her friend's dog Milo, and I think it's oh, you have to tell Milo what's what, and the narrator just repeats Milo what's what.
You guys are quoting the whole book. No one's
spoilers top to bottom.
We could have Tom bleep more of these, honestly. That could be fun.
I love it. I love being quick.
I would like to let the record show that we got 41 minutes and 20 seconds into this podcast without asking Cora about how much of the book is autobiography. I'm not going to ask you that question because it is the worst question, but I am going to ask you, to the extent that you combine experiences that are adjacent to ones that you clearly had, and obviously things from your imagination, especially as the sort of characters siblings are involved, but also romantic scenes are involved. Do you feel a pressure to account for the representation of the parties, I guess? How do you think about that when putting it together? Because we talked about in journalism, your duty to your subject is to not misrepresent them or not purposely make them look bad. And, in fiction or autofiction, there's no such requirement. But
famously
I can
now
tell.
started being sued by his family members.
I can tell when I read autofiction that's been written like a little too close to the divorce or whatever. And it's like, well, is this the character? Is this the best version of the character? Or is this working yourself some stuff out on the page? And like, yeah, I don't know. It's like when you have such a range of experience put into it, like the innocence of the siblings, but also like, you know, passionate romantic encounters, old bosses, like, you know, characters that sort of don't represent the Me Too movement, but sort of gesture at it. How do you like, what do you think your duty is when writing a book like this?
I do think one has a duty to represent reality to the best of one's abilities, or experience to the best of one's abilities, and hopefully to you know, if you're drawing from life, to do so in a way that's thoughtful and not out of spite or some other worse impulse. For sure, I think that ties into kind of the journalistic energy, where, you know, you don't want to come to a project with a motive that's off. And I think I was pretty young when I started writing this, or I was drawing from experiences from when I was young. And because 10 years have passed and I'm in my mid-30s, there is this way in which this book is about a completely different set of people than currently exist, myself included. So
we're their parents.
Right. Yes. No one will know what that means, but
they will if they do the reading.
They will if they do the reading. Yeah, and that's the kind of paradoxical and interesting and fun part, I think, of drawing from life for me. Though maybe in a future book I'll do it less. It just seems like such a rich source of material and energy. It's hard for me not to, I guess, in my writing practice. And then moving things around also helps me feel as though I'm exerting control as an author over what the story is and how it's operating, and that changes it from, you know, again, being some account of reality to a fictional, you know, work.
Are you
okay? Sorry, go ahead. No, I've talked a lot.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say,
let the men talk.
Okay,
let men speak. They're always getting interrupted.
I'm just being silenced. No, well, you were just saying maybe in a future book, are you like gathering fragments in the same way, like with a mind towards something else brewing?
Definitely. Yeah, always. I think I can't turn it off. And because it's how I write, I'm still at it. And I'd love to write a full length novel soon. And if you're doing it this way, it takes time, apparently. So yes, I'm at it. Definitely still at it.
Okay. Allow me one more indulgence about another book I just read. Over the last 2 days, I read another slim tome, The Moon and the Bonfires by, I don't really know how to say an Italian name. It's like Cesare Pavese. And again, really interesting to read after these two, because well, your book and Perfection by Latronico are both about like being in your 20s and 30s, and end with like, okay, we're in our 30s now, and what does that mean? And looking back in the 20s, but not so much like looking forward, like a little bit, but you're just there in your mid 30s. This one was interesting because it's like, it was published in 1950, and it's some autobiography, but not much. But it's about this guy who was like a bastard in Italy, rural Italy in like the 30s. And he comes back after the war, after he's made it in America. And it's him kind of wandering this small rural area where he grew up and trying to figure out what went on there during the war. And it kind of skips all of his 20s and 30s. But one of the things I took away from it was like, it's about how he being, you know, this poor bastard, literally, and even like the rich people who worked for, and he worked for, and even the richer people that they looked up to. It's like they all just like wanted more than they had, and they all had the same level of discontentment with what they had. And so reading, you know, finishing your book and the Latronico book, like, and then reading this, it's like they both end at this point of like, well, we've had this and it's kind of wrapped up, and like, what do we want next? I don't know. For context too, Pavese killed himself like a year after writing this. So there's like another edge there of like maybe his personal view of like, it's never enough. It's never enough. I don't know. I just wanted to ramble a bit there about that.
That was a good ramble. And I will say, like, I think the best books and like even the best shows, like I definitely feel this way about Mad Men. You close the book and you have a sense of the narrator continuing or the characters continuing to live their life off the page.
Yeah.
And so if you start something in your 20s, it's written about somebody in their 20s, you know, you are almost carrying around a past version of that character in your head, but now like the reader is too. But if that character was going to like actually live their life off the page and catch up to you, their life might look nothing like yours at 35. And I think that's like the beauty of literature. It sets up this parallel experience that other people are able to sort of dip into.
I like that a lot. I think sometimes that the character in this book is more passive than I would like to think that I am in some ways, or that she's drifting a little more lost or something. And, you know, I was laid off from BuzzFeed, but I had been accepted to an MFA and I went and did that for 3 years. And the character in the book, you know, doesn't do that. And that's a pretty big difference between us. That isn't there. And so that's sort of interesting to me, like these expressions of agency between the author and their characters, and what do you share and what are the differences, and what do you do with that space between them if it is drawn from life and it is autofiction. I guess the character could have done an MFA, but I don't think that would have made for a good book.
Mm-hmm. So Daisy, you just said something about like after a book ends and you wonder like how does their life go on. I'm thinking of like the way people have been using AI to do that sort of thing. There was the thing, Alexis Ohanian, the Reddit co-founder, this was doing the rounds on Twitter the other day. It was a photo of him and his mother, and he like animated it to like if she was hugging him or something. And obviously this caused an uproar. People, various views saying this is horrible, this is good, whatever, etc. But I bring this all up to say the way that you write about AI, which becomes a topic at one point in the book, is really clear-headed or clear-eyed in a way that like is so often not seen in writing about it, whether it's evangelism or like, you know, people trying to take it down, and you could call it letterism, whatever. But yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting choice to bring it in, but in such a matter-of-fact way of here's what this is. This is a machine. You talk about it as this next word predictor. They produce language, not truth. They generate text. You shouldn't rely on them to produce knowledge. How did that come into this?
That was straight from a training we got on AI at the Associated Press. I can just tell you that. Those were from the guy who came in and said, listen, I'm going to warn you about this technology that is going to change how you do your jobs. And here's what you need to know about it. And it took, you know, it was a several hours long seminar, but those lines really stayed with me. I thought they were so interesting. And I thought, I think AI and large language models and ChatGPT is kind of fascinating. And I'm happy you say that I'm clear-eyed about it. I might be starry-eyed. I don't know. I don't think I am as scared or worried or negative on it as I maybe should or could be. But I guess a lot of people are doomsayers about it. So there's, you know, that.
They're doing that work for you.
Yeah, they're doing that work. So I can just be interested in it. But especially for the production of information and knowledge and news and writing, even fiction. And I do think it's possible that it could lead to very generic writing, and it could change the way people learn and degrade thought and all of those things. The recent articles about how college students are using it to write essays I thought were so interesting. And it seems so up for grabs what will happen next to writing and language because of it. Just very quickly, just in the last couple of years already, it's doing a lot. And there are really fun ways to talk to it, or useful ways to use it, I found.
Yeah.
All right, popcorn rounds. Would you rather be an information or an age?
Information.
Why?
It seems so ethereal and abstract and ageless, and I couldn't immediately think of what it would mean to be an age, truthfully.
I guess, yeah, if you were going to be one, it would be more like an epoch. I agree. I would prefer to be an information, but Francis is probably going to say information, agree. But you're an age though.
I'm an age. I'm the humble age of 30. No, I would much rather be an information. Would you rather be a cell or like a whole species? Would you rather be a person or a family? I don't know. It's kind of that, right?
Well, I guess if you're an age, right, you're an era, it's sort of, you get to be a time period. But then which one?
You could fit so much information inside that.
That's true. Right. The age eats the information. The information.
Well, okay. We also haven't done this one in a while, so I feel like we got to do it. Would you rather desire or be desired?
Classic.
If I'm desired, do I get to still
answer for yourself and then answer for your narrator?
Oh no. I guess if you're desired without desiring yourself, that seems not ideal. So I choose desiring. I would like to be able to desire. And I think
you'd rather desire than be desired. And the narrator would rather. Okay. That tracks with my perception of the narrator as well.
It's the only, to me, it's the only answer. Though I guess we need people in the world who of each.
I'm telling you, it's 50-50. Every time you survey a group, it's 50-50.
But we live in the world where we can experience both. So
thank God.
Yeah. Otherwise, we would be in trouble, right? But then people really would have to choose. It would have to be 50-50 or we'd be stuck.
Yeah, I think desiring is only meaningful because one can be desired and like vice versa.
I'll say this to the listener. Would you rather have read Information Age or not? There's only one answer to that.
Well, because you get to read it now. You should go buy it. And it comes out in a week, right?
The table's at McNally right now, apparently.
Right now. Run, do not walk to your local McNally Jackson. Cora, thank you for coming on.
This is Tasteland. See you next week.
Thank you for having me.